So, this is the first of a series of 4 weekends devoted to the subject of the future. Each session, each weekend, is pretty much self-contained. There's a certain continuity, but we're moving toward the center point from various positions on a circumference. In this first weekend, we're considering the subject of time and the whole concept of the future. The point of departure I'd like to suggest is this. Time is a social institution, not a physical reality. In other words, there's no such thing as time in the natural world, the world of stars, waters, mountains, clouds, and living organisms. There is, however, rhythm. The rhythm of tides, the rhythm of biological processes. But time, as we understand it, is a social institution, much like language, numbers, concepts, or measurements, like inches, meters, or lines of latitude and longitude. All these things are social conventions. The word convention comes from the Latin convenire, meaning to come together, to agree upon something, to hold a convention. Of course, when we call something conventional, we often mean you needn't take it seriously. Now, are we going to take time seriously? That's the big question, and it depends on what you mean. If you don't understand that time is a convention, you'll take it very seriously. You'll be driven by it. Time is money. Time is of the essence. We live in a culture, particularly in the Western world, where we are literally driven by time. If you read a book like Jules Henry's marvelous Culture Against Man, you'll find extraordinary documentation of just how much this culture is driven. Even psychologists have shifted terminology. What we once called instincts are now drives. This feeling, this drive, makes us obsessed with deadlines. There's always something we've got to do, somewhere we've got to be. People feel driven even when they have an appointment in the future. Some find this deeply unsettling. They're so eager, so anxious, that they can't focus on anything else until the event occurs. In the natural, physical world, however, there's no time. There is motion. Time, then, is a way of measuring motion by comparing it with some constant. The constant we use is a second, divided into 360 or 60 degrees. From that, we create a clock, where a pointer revolves around a circle at a constant speed. The clock, like a ruler, is abstract. It's merely a tool for measurement, not something to be taken too seriously. That doesn't mean we're going to melt down all clocks and stop using them. Social conventions like time and measurements are valuable. They help us coordinate, like a compass helps us navigate. But we must remember that these tools are written across the vast emptiness of the cosmos. The ground of being, that is, existence itself, is elusive. You can't grasp it, describe it, or stand firmly upon it. You can, however, experience it. Perhaps the entire universe is such an experience, an imagination. But we take time and space far too seriously. Once we lose sight of their conventionality, we invest emotions into them. Think about attending a game, football, basketball, or chess. At first, you know it's just a game. But as you get absorbed, your emotions flare. You start cheering for one side, rooting for the underdog. This is precisely what happens in life. We forget that it's a game. We take it all terribly seriously. From the moment we're born, people assign us roles. You're like this. It's not like you to do that. We start to believe in an identity, our role in the game. We invest in it. We build it up. Over time, we become attached to this identity. Then, eventually, it starts to fade. We age. We decline. And we're devastated because we thought this game was all there was. This brings us to one of the greatest hoaxes. The future. We're doing a whole seminar on the future, but it's vital to understand the nature of hoaxes. When I talk like this, don't take me too seriously. I exaggerate, because if I don't, no one listens. Philosophers who speak moderately, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, are respected, but they don't stimulate thought. To provoke thought, sometimes you need to make outrageous statements, but with a warning. These statements are tools for awakening, not truths to cling to. What I want to convey is the importance of experiencing the ground of being, that vast emptiness in which everything happens. This isn't about philosophy or logic. It's about direct experience. When you experience the ground of being, you realize how much of life is a game. Time, space, the future, they're tools, useful but not ultimate. Contrast this with Western culture, which worships the future. We're always looking forward, hoping for progress. Compare this to the Hindu or Buddhist view, where time is cyclical. Everything that arises eventually falls apart. Individuals die. Species vanish. Everything dissolves. For them, the future isn't a source of hope. It's simply part of the rhythm. This cyclical view contrasts sharply with the Western idea of time as linear progress, like a graph climbing endlessly upward. But if you look at the stars, the galaxies, the planets, they're all moving in circles, going nowhere. So, while we Westerners are obsessed with the future, the Hindus and Buddhists laugh. They know it's all a hoax. History, too, is part of this game. In the West, we see history as a progression. In the East, it's rhythmic, repetitive. The Chinese kept chronicles, but those are records, not histories trying to extract meaning. Ultimately, these concepts of time and history are conventions. They help us navigate life, but they're not real. What's real is the ground of being, the background of existence. And when you experience it, you'll wonder why you didn't notice it all along. So we, on the other hand, from St. Augustine, was the real troublemaker. I'm not absolutely sure that the Hebrews had a linear theory of time. It's questionable. They might have had, because they did look forward to the coming of the Messiah. The day of the Lord had to come. They had this apocalyptic idea that they were in such a wretched situation that there was going to come a day when the divine power would intervene in human events and set everything right. That day ahead, knocking session called the Last Judgment, everybody would be put in a lot of, well, what St. Augustine did with that, you see, was reject the cyclic theory of time. Not so much on account of the day of the Lord coming at the end of time, but on account of the incarnation. He was somehow fixed on the idea that when Jesus was crucified, that was the one full, perfect, sufficient sacrifice for the sins of the whole world. It happened once, and if time is cyclic, he argued, this would have to happen again and again and again, and that couldn't be. That's all. There is only one time, one progression of time, from the creation of the world through its redemption by the sacrifice of the cross and on to the final judgment. Then, time would cease, and we should be in eternity. From this, theologians increasingly began to think about the historicity of Jesus and emphasized that it was a historical fact. History, as worked out in the Bible stories, from the creation, through the fall, to the doings of Noah, Abraham, the captivity of the Israelites in Egypt, and the giving of the law by Moses, was worked out as being the mighty acts of God. These revealed the divine passion for the cause of human events. And the funny thing is that, although many historians living today are not Christians, not Jews, and don't believe in anything, they still think of history as a significant momentum toward progress. Something that children's children are going to get. We all suffer and live for then. Just go to, it has this good on the end of the line. Now, we really don't know, and can't talk about progress unless we know where we're going and are making progress toward that desired object. But most people involved in what they call progress haven't the faintest idea where they're going. I have found increasingly that businessmen and military men are astoundingly impractical. They just don't know what they want. They think they know. I had a long discussion with Air Force strategic people. They asked me, and some other philosophers, what is your basis for moral behavior? So I pulled their legs and said, my moral behavior is pure selfishness. And very practical selfishness at that. I said, of course, I am talking like this because you're all hard-headed people. I'm not going to give you any sentimentality or stupid stuff about love and so on, because you're military men. You have to see that the United States of America, as a collective selfishness, is properly looked after. Now, I said, of course, in my own personal life, when I'm selfish, I'm not too crude about it. I don't run around hitting people over the head and saying, gimme, gimme, gimme. I pretend like I'm a public servant, that I'm out for the best interests of all. And you remember the story that Flora told at the end of the last session, where the Dalai Lama's brother says that, yes, it was very nice to come to the United States, But the problem, the difference between here and Tibet, was that here, you have all sorts of power and whatnot, but you have no time. In Tibet, you have a very primitive existence and lots of time. It's so interesting to get into a culture that is so-called primitive. It's very easy now because you can take a jet plane to Puerto Vallarta. In a very short time, you can be in touch with a culture that is ageless. You only have to go north or south along the coast to the Indian villages, which you can only reach by boat or by a jeep through terrible jungle roads. When you get up to these people, suddenly, everything stops. You know where they're going. They're doing the things they've always done. We always say, it's a sleepy village, not very exciting. But, actually, Zen is the art of combining an exciting life with living in the complete present. It's very curious. It's not sleepy at all. It's not like you'd think of a sleepy village. When you watch Zen monks walking, they don't dawdle. They're like cats. You know how a cat crosses the road? It has a complete sense of where it's going. It's just like that. And that's what a Zen monk walking is like. It's a most curious combination of virtues. The economy of motion, the expertness in doing what you do, and, at the same time, not being in a hurry. There's this Zen master in San Francisco, Suzuki Roshi, who is particularly admired by his students for achieving an enormous amount of work without ever seeming to make the slightest effort. He's been working down at Tassajara Springs, where they've rearranged a rocky stream to make it look more natural. He can move bigger rocks than any of the tough young men working alongside him. It's fantastic, but it's all based on a real relationship to the material, especially the material moment. It's about working in such a way that you never strain yourself because you never rush. You don't have in mind the goal of getting there as quickly as possible. Instead, you value every phase of the work. It's like playing music. You're completely involved in producing the sounds as they unfold, without hurrying to reach the end. It's the same as sex. A lot of people are in a hurry to reach the end, and therefore they never fully experience it. They have nothing but orgasms. And while orgasms are important, they're nothing without the build-up. If life were just about the end result, it would be like taking diet pills instead of enjoying a meal, or like having a pill to replace sleep. Speaking of sleep, I just want to mention the importance of it. There's a special kind of sleep the Hindus call sushupti, sleep without dreams. It's very deep. Isn't sleep funny? You go to bed, and time is totally eliminated until you wake up. It's as though you wake up immediately after going to sleep, yet something profound happens in between. There's a way to access completely profound sleep, which I call temple sleep. I found it best in a protected area outdoors, either on a sunny afternoon or at night. Find a spot under a tree, get a suitable pad, lie on your back, and stretch in every direction. Imagine your body becoming incredibly heavy, sinking into the earth, and surrendering to the night. You let go of all control, all anxiety, and all care. If you go deep enough, you wake just before dawn, when the sky is a deep blue, and the stars are still visible through the leaves. That feeling, when morning comes and everything awakens, is extraordinary. There's a freshness to the world at dawn that you can't experience any other time. Yet, in our culture, sleep is seen as a waste of time. But what I'm trying to show is how restorative unconsciousness can be. It's the same with death. Robert Louis Stevenson's poem comes to mind. Under the wide and starry sky, dig me a grave and let me lie. Glad did I live, and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. If you can see death like that, just as when you go to sleep, you abandon all cares and responsibilities, then death becomes a release. People often have marvelous experiences at the moment of death when they surrender to it. Suddenly, all responsibilities are gone. No more bills to pay, clocks to watch, or problems to solve. The whole strain of being somebody is abandoned, and in that moment, some experience an enormous delight. They see the point of everything. Initiation rites often involve a symbolic death, rituals where you abandon your identity and responsibilities. Baptism is one such example, though its deeper meaning is often forgotten. When you emerge from this ritual death, you're given a new name, a name that symbolizes